Close your eyes and imagine a world before the crackle of a fireplace, before chimneys pulled smoke neatly skyward, before iron pots hung securely on their hooks. Imagine homes filled with soft haze, where every meal was an act of patience, invention, and quiet companionship with fire. In those days, cooking was not a convenience, it was a craft of survival. Families learned to boil water with hot stones, to bake bread in ashes, to soften beans in clay, to dry fish in rafters where smoke curled slowly. Meals were not rushed. They were gentle conversations with flame, earth, and time. This journey will guide you through that forgotten kitchen, step by step, hearth by hearth, showing how people cooked with stones, sticks, leaves, and the quiet chemistry of fermentation. Each segment is an invitation to drift deeper into history, to picture meals rising from the simplest tools, and to let your mind settle into the rhythm of the past. If you find peace in these slow echoes of history, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Join this growing circle of listeners who close their eyes to stories that soothe, teach, and accompany sleep. Each episode is a calm walk through forgotten times, a library of quiet knowledge. So take a breath, let the smoke clear in your imagination, and step softly into a world where the hearth was humble, yet every meal carried the warmth of survival. In homes without fireplaces, where smoke drifted freely and fire was rationed, cooks leaned heavily on flavor that required no fuel. Herbs, roots, seeds, and wild greens became not just decoration but essential craft. They preserved food, masked harshness, brightened dull grains, and turned plain stews into memories worth repeating. In a world where flame was precious and smoke a burden, seasoning was the quiet fire of the kitchen. Herbs hung in rafters, bundles of thyme, sage, mint, and wild greens dangled from beams where smoke curled. The drying was unintentional at first. Kitchens had no other air, but it became deliberate. Smoke kept pests away. Air turned leaves crisp. Their flavors intensified. Crumbled into stews, teas, or breads, they carried the house's very air. Some herbs were burned gently, not to cook food but to fragrance it. Rosemary or juniper laid on embers before meat was roasted, their smoke lending perfume while fire did its work. In chimneyless rooms, these scents cut through harsher wood smoke, making the air edible. Roots and seeds. When flame was difficult, flavor still came from pounded roots and seeds. Mustard seeds ground with stone added fire to bland porridges. Horseradish grated into clabber curd made a meal sting alive. Fennel, caraway, and dill stretched simple breads into something remembered. Salt was scarce in some places, abundant in others, but wherever it appeared it was treated as seasoning and preservative. A pinch could awaken beans. A handful could transform meat into storage. Spices traded across distances. Pepper, cinnamon, cardamom were rare treasures, used sparingly. Often hidden in feasts as signs of generosity, seasoning with smoke. Even without chimneys, smoke itself was a seasoning. A pot moved closer or further changed how strong its flavor became. Bread baked in ash carried whispers of wood. Cheese dried in rafters became smoky without intention. What today is delicacy was once inevitable. Every bite carried the house's hearth with it. Fermented flavorings. Not all seasoning came fresh. Ferments made condiments that deepened taste. Kraut brine brightened broths. Fish sauces added hidden depth to porridges. Pickle juice sharpened stews. These were flavorings that required no flame, only patience. In homes where fuel was precious, such seasonings were priceless shortcuts. Honey, vinegar, and balanced sweetness came from honey when fortune smiled, or from dried fruits crushed into stews. Vinegar from souring wine or fruit balanced fat, lifted beans, and cleansed pots. The combination, sweet and sour, was an early luxury, a way of making plain grains sing. The rhythm of gathering seasoning was also a social act. Children gathered herbs, elders knew where roots grew, women tied bundles, men carried salt from trade. Herbs and rafters were as much decoration as pantry. A guest could read a family's wealth by how full their beams hung. Flavor was not garnish. It was identity. Failures and cautions. Herbs left damp mold. Next time, tied looser, dried longer. Too much salt made meat hard. Patience was needed to soak it back. Mustard ground too coarse burned tongues. Finer grinding taught balance. Spices spoiled if hidden from air improperly. Clay jars or wax cloth kept them honest. Every mistake taught moderation. Every correction lived in memory. Modern echo-you can repeat these practices easily. Hang herbs to dry in your kitchen. Use kraut brine in soup. Deglaze with vinegar. Smoke food gently on coals with rosemary or juniper. Notice how little fuel it takes to change a whole dish when you let herbs and spices do the talking. Flavor as survival in chimneyless kitchens. Herbs and spices were not luxuries. They made less food taste like more. They covered smoke's heaviness, stretched lean stews, and gave poor meals dignity. Where fire was rationed, seasoning was abundance. Where chimneys were absent, herbs strung from rafters were the true ornaments of the home. Flame is noisy. It arrives with a rush, throws itself upward, snaps and spits, shows off in bright tongues that lick at wooden air. But cooking, real, steady, nourishing cooking, does not belong to the flame. It belongs to the embers. Beneath the glitter of fire lives the red-brown heart of heat, a bed of coals under a thin blanket of ash, stones warmed clear through, a patient glow that prefers hours to minutes and listening to commands. Before chimneys, before dials and knobs and numbers, there were dirt and stone, wind and wood, and a cook's eyes, nose, hands, and skin. To cook in the language of embers is to read time by scent, to measure doneness by the feel of warmth on your cheek, to hear the subtle hiss that means enough. First the ground is made right. You choose a spot out of the wind, on dry earth. You smooth a shallow hollow with the heel of your palm, ring it with stones, river stones if you have them, because they hold heat and return it kindly. Kindling goes into the center, twigs and slender branches laid carefully, then larger pieces of seasoned wood laid so air can breathe between them. You invite flame. It comes, as flame does, with drama. But we are not here for drama. We are here for what follows, the long bazan, the settling. When flame climbs down, wood collapses into coal, heat sinks and evens, ash settles into a soft, pale quilt. That is when the lesson begins. Cooking on embers has three quiet dialects. In the embers, beside the fire, and on the stones that I end the embers is the older speech. Roots and bulbs, wild onions, garlic, cattail rhizomes, tubers whose names we have forgotten, go straight into ash and coal. Their skins char, blister, and crack. Inside, water turns to sweet steam. Starch loosens and becomes something like kindness. Pull one out with a stick, tap away the ash, peel back the black. The flesh beneath is damp and shining, perfumed by earth and smoke, tree-line resin, clean dirt after rain, a memory of grass. If you grew up near fires, this smell is the first history you learn by nose. Beside the fire is how you treat food that wants smoke and gentleness more than direct flame, fish and small birds swaddled in leaves. Narrow strips of meat you want to dry as much as cook. A joint that needs soft heat to coddle gristle into silk. You hold it just at the edge, close enough to feel the heat, far enough to avoid the fire's temper. This is a dialogue, not a duel. Turn slowly when the fat begins to sing. Bring it nearer when the coals sigh. Withdraw when a sudden whisper of flame remembers itself. Smoke stops being a threat and becomes a spice. A thin veil of forest caught on the surface of food, on the stones, is the craft of flat heat. Choose stones that do not explode, river burnished, already full of water once, already told the story of heat. Warm them in the fire until they breathe warmth. Drag one out, brush it clean, and lay a thin batter across it. Ground grain loosened with water, salted, maybe scattered with chopped wild herbs. You can hear the stone's breath in the first soft sizzle as the surface sets. Steam lifts through from below, firming the underside while the top dries to a tender skin. Break it with your fingers and the fragrance is simple and complete. Warm grain, green edge, a hint of smoke. An aftertaste of time. Working with embers is a study in time, but time understood by the senses, not the clock. How hot is hot enough? The back of your hand knows, hovered over the coals for the count of a few slow breaths. When do you rake the ash clear? When the surface gleams dull cherry and the hiss of fat turns from sharp to soft. When do you pull the coal bed to one side to make a cool zone? When the air above the pit stops shimmering and the smell of hot stone replaces the bite of raw flame. In a world without instruments, the cook is the instrument. Eyes for color, ears for sound, skin for distance, nose for the moment heat becomes flavor, leaves become cookware where pots are scarce. Wrap fish or fowl in wet, aromatic leaves, grape, birch, cattail, whatever the land gives. Leaf holds in moisture, shields from ash, and makes a private steam room for flesh and bone. Sometimes there is clay. Smear a thin coat around a fish or a small bird, set it at the coal's edge, watch the clay firm and crack. When you break it away, the skin comes too, and what remains inside is soft and fragrant and free of ash. In a place without tools, the land becomes the tool. Bread at the fire is more than flour and water. Grain is cleaned, crushed between stones, wetted with river water, salted from sweat or rock, loosened to the right pour or the right spread. It becomes a flat cake on stone, or a thicker puck tucked under a cover of hot ash. The coals seal the outside while steam brings the center to tenderness. There is no roar, no timed bell. There is only the moment when the cake yields to a fingertip and the edge lifts with a faint sigh. Bread's flavor is not merely grain and salt. It is patience, and then there is fat, rendering as conversation. As meat warms, golden drops appear, gather, then fall. Each drop hits a coal and flashes, a bright flare and then nothing. In that instant, fat marries smoke and returns as perfume that paints the meat again. There is caramel here, but not from sugar jars, the crisping surface of protein and starch, the browning edge of batter, the sweetness coaxed out of a root pulled from ash. If your kitchen has knobs, you can simulate this. You cannot fake the way a fire writes on food. Night cooking is the academy of attention. Fire will light the scene, but darkness asks you to listen. The soft exhale of coals. The change in crackle when wood shifts from flame to glow. The unsteady drip of fat that tells you which side is too hot. You adjust your stance to wind. You learn which would smoke spicy, pine and its resin, which burns clean, birch, which writes a long bass note beneath meat, oak. Children drowse in laps. Elders tend the fire with the rhythm of breath. Stories are told, because this is a circle, and circles ask for stories, and the smoke takes them upward and salts them into memory. Even ash is ingredient, not residue. Sifted fine, it tamps down too sharp sourness, hushes bitterness, lends an ancient grey to stews. Some roots are rolled in warm ash to loosen burnt skins and keep the heart damp. The ash left after a good night's cooking smells not of waste but of work done. Warm, clean, faintly sweet, with a soft mineral hush of stone. The toolkit is humble and many-voiced. A long stick to rake coals, to lift, to turn. A flat stone that is both pan and plate. A forked limb as a hanger or spit. Bark to protect hands, to fold, to carry. Nothing single purpose. Scarcity breeds competence. Fewer tools, more uses, better attention. With each use, tools take on a shine of story. This poker turned the coals the night the first child was born. That stone made the bread that was broken when the last snow finally left. Caution is ceremony. Wet stones go near the heat first to dry. No one throws a river stone into flame to hear it pop. Ash is a valve. You cool a corner by pulling ash over coals, not by drowning them. You stand with the wind at your back, or to the side, not facing the fire's breath. Bark mitts or folded skins save fingerprints you will need tomorrow. The quiet kitchen is not reckless. It is orderly in a way that does not need to be announced. A map of flavors is drawn in smoke. Pine writes green and bittersweet. Birch writes clean and pale. Oak writes long and deep. Juniper writes sharp, salty, and medicinal. River stones hold heat softly and long. Mountain stones heat fast and surrender fast. This is how regions are born in cooking, the land's handwriting on the tongue. Before cuisine, there is fuel. Before recipe, there is wood and always company. Food at the fire is shared because the fire itself is shared. People sit in a ring. Hands pass bread inward and outward. Elders take first to bless the circle. Children get the crisp edges. Strangers become less strange by the second piece. The cook's pride is not in display but in the faces that relax when they taste. The embers are not a stage. They are a table. The modern kitchen can learn from this. A turn of a knob is not the same as an agreement with heat. Cooking with embers teaches low and slow in the original key, coaxing instead of forcing, listening instead of timing by tyranny. A pot does not need to roil. It can murmur. Bread does not need to leap. It can lift as if remembering. Meat does not need to shout. It can speak caramel in a quiet voice. The best cooks today, though their stoves are bright steel, still keep a small ember in their methods. They move things nearer and farther. They read surfaces. They let rest do part of the work. In the end. Embers teach humility. More heat is not more flavor. More spice is not more pleasure. The right distance, the right time, the right silence. These make room for the ingredient to say its own name. When the coals finally turn to grey and the last warmth drains into stone, there is a smell in the morning that is half smoke, half sleep, and holy enough. The ring of stones remains. A palm smooths the ash. A new day tests the wind. The first thin slab of dough meets the old warm place, and the circle begins again, not because flame demands it, but because embers invite it. Before there were tiled hearths and iron cranes, entire meals vanished into the earth and came back transformed. The earth oven, pit oven, ground oven, imu, HNGI, Pachamenka, Umu, Lovo, wears many names and plants the same idea wherever humans. Settled long enough to listen to soil, build fire into stone, fold food into leaves, seal the world shut, and let steam and time do what flame cannot do politely. It is heat turned hospitable, pressure without panic, a technique as old as ceremony and as patient as geology. An earth oven begins with place. You choose ground that drains, never a hollow where water sulks, close enough to wood, far from roots that would complain. Wind matters, and so does slope. A slight crown is kind. Rain will not pool, smoke will travel, and when you open the oven later, the first breath the food tastes will be clean. You mark a circle with your heel or with a branch, then cut into the skin of the land. The pit need not be grand. Depth and diameter answer to appetite and company. A family supper might ask for a waist-deep hollow. A feast for a village becomes a shallow grave for stones. The stones are the oven's memory. They remember heat and return it slowly, evenly, loyally. River stones, lava rock, granite. What matters is that they do not burst under sudden thirst. You stack them in the pit like vertebrae, leaving breath between each. The fire you build on and around them is not a tantrum. It is an argument you intend to win by patience. You feed dry wood first to wake the stones, then thicker fuel to persuade them. Hours pass and you read the stones the way an old baker reads a brick oven. Their color dulls to deepened gray, their surfaces sweat resin and then burn it off, and a hand held over the pit learns the difference between hot and through hot. Now the work of wetness begins. A ground oven is a marriage of dry stored heat with wet heat born in the moment. Around the pit you gather what the land offers as blanket and broth, seaweed, where coasts are kind, fern fronds, banana leaves, cabbage leaves, reeds, grasses dunked in a stream, even damp burlap in later centuries. You build a first bed over the stones, a green mattress that will both protect and perfume. The sizzle that rises when fronds kiss rock is the first sentence in the long conversation of steam. Food is not thrown in, it is tucked. Whole roots, yams, manioc, taro, beets are scrubbed, sometimes scored. Corn still in husk lies like closed books that will read themselves. Gourds, if you have them, can be filled. Grains, herbs, a trickle of fat, a precious handful of dried fruit, then sealed with paste or plug. Meat respects the same logic. Large pieces for long tenderness, bone-in for joy. A shoulder of goat, a leg of venison, a haunch of wild boar, a whole fish proud with scales, all make sense here. Salt is generous. Fat is guidance. Herbs are not a scatter but a braid. Thyme, bay, wild leek, sage, or their local cousins bound into bundles that can be found later and praised. Wrapping is its own craft. Leaves are not ornament, they are architecture. Banana leaf makes packets that shed water and slide open like gifts. Seaweed is both blanket and seasoning, a watery salt, a green sweetness that turns meat toward the sea's memory. Bark or reed mats can be tied with vines. When leaf is scarce, clay becomes a skin. Smear a gentle coat around a fish, a bird, even a loaf. Clay hardens in heat and cracks cleanly later, taking skin and ash with it, layer follows layer. Over the first green bed, the food. Over the food, more green. Over the green, perhaps a damp cloth, then a humidity of soil. Every layer is a promise. You will not scorch, you will not dry, you will not leak your flavor into the ground without receiving some of the ground's wisdom back. If the pit is shallow, you finish with a lid, boards or flat stones or woven branches, and a final quilt of earth. If the pit is deeper, you shovel soil directly, sculpting a mound that looks like a small hill with secrets. Now the oven disappears, and with it the fidgets of visible cooking. There is nothing to stir, nothing to flip, nothing to baste. There is only time you can use well: mending a net, washing a child's hair, picking burrs from a dog's fur, laying out bowls, telling a story whose middle never used to fit in a day but fits now. You tend a small signal fire on top or to the side, thin, polite smoke, so wandering feet know where the villager's breath is tied. Anyone who has cooked with clocks will find this part difficult at first. Trust tastes like idleness until you bite it. Inside, physics is priest. Stones give their hoarded heat to green and food. Green gives its water to air. Sealed air becomes pressure. Pressure becomes penetration. Collagen forgets to be rope and becomes silk. Cell walls negotiate and agree. Starch are knots. The hard lesson of chewing is replaced by the easy learning of falling apart. What would burn in a pan and boil dry in a pot cannot misbehave here. This is tenderness by design, not by accident. The aroma starts far before the unveiling. The ground exhales at seams you made on purpose, at a corner where the lid boards cross, at an edge where two clods shake hands. The smell is not the splashy perfume of a grill. It is deeper, a warm sigh, leaf becoming tea, fat becoming language. Soil admitting it has always known herbs better than we have. Children orbit the mound. Elders pretend not to be eager. The one who poured the stones keeps one hand on the lid as if reading a heartbeat through wood. Opening is ritual. You do not tear. You lift. Dust first, then boards, then greens loosened by steam into slippery silk. The first sight is blur and gold. If there is clay, you rap it once and it yields like a stubborn door that always meant to be friendly. If there is seaweed, it shrinks to threads that stain the hands in honor. A fish glows with a lacquer of its own oils. A joint bends to the string without pride. A root breaks with wet light inside. The heat that escapes is kind rather than scalding. People lean in. No one is scolded. There is room. Earth oven food is communal long before it is portioned. Work made it so. Stones carried, leaves gathered, wood fetched, soil lifted. Portion follows the same circle that built the oven. Elders taste first, not because they are above hunger, but because their faces are the towns where the vein. Children get bright edges and the sweet vegetables, which teach them that patience is delicious. Strangers receive something from the center, which says inside without words. Broth, there is always broth, even without a pot, collects at the bottom where leaf and meat and tuber have been trading stories. That broth is the flavor of agreement across the world. The vocabulary changes and the grammar stays. On islands, Imu and Lovo pack fish with coconut and taro. Seaweed plays both instrument and note. In Aotearoa, a HNGI leans on Manuka's smoky grace and the power of volcanic stone. In the Andes, a Pachamanca paints potatoes and corn and meats with Huacate and Earth's altitude, burying a festival and digging up a chorus. In the Arctic, hot stones and blubber wrap into the ground's cold logic, making a kitchen out of contrast. In deserts, date fronds and dune sand trap heat so cleanly that bread lifts in buried bowls like moons. The failures are as instructive as feasts. Stones that explode taught us to dry them first. Meat that dried taught us to make the green layer thicker, wetter, friendlier. Bitter leaves taught us to line them with sweeter ones or to blanch before they became blankets. A leak taught us to respect edges. A smoky bite taught us what would belong near food and what would only belong in fires that shout, "Why does the ground cook so well?" Because it is an oven, mass and enclosure, radiant heat and captured steam. The soil insulates, the stones radiate, the sealed chamber builds a soft pressure that persuades rather than bullies. Nothing scorches unless you forget kindness. Nothing boils away because there is nowhere for the wet to run. It is the opposite of modern panic heat. It is heat that counts to 10 slowly and then keeps counting for hours. In a life without chimneys. The earth oven brings food indoors without rooms. Weather can do as it likes. A rain will not drown what the ground is holding. A wind only ruffles the smoke braid you tied to the sky. It is portable in the sense that you can shape it anywhere there is ground and wood and stone and the will to wait. It leaves almost nothing behind. A warmer patch of soil, a collapsed blackness where the fire taught the stones, a story full of verbs that are gentle, gather, tuck, cover, wait, lift, share. When you return to your kitchen with knobs and steel and timers, the earth oven still has something to teach. It teaches stacking, flavors nested and layered, protections built into process. It teaches rest, that most food needs a sealed minute. After the heat stops, a breath where juices redraw their maps. It teaches generosity. Long cooks make big tables. And it teaches that the land is not only where food grows, it can be where food finishes, a partner in the last miracle of making hunger into hospitality. If you try a small echo of it today, do it politely. Heat stones slowly. Bind your packets thoughtfully. Build wetness into your layers. Seal as if a promise were being kept. Then give time back some of what it once gave you. While you wait, let the rest of your life catch up, the letter you meant to write, the mending you meant to mend, the child who tells a story with more arms than sense. When you lift the lid, do it as if opening a book you loved as a child and somehow forgot. The smell will remind you what reading is. And when people eat, watch their shoulders. Earth oven food relaxes more than jaws. It asks less of teeth and more of gratitude. It is food that has been kept, not merely heated, kept moist, kept whole, kept patient. It tastes like something that remembers being buried and does not resent you for digging it up. It tastes like a favor returned. Before bronze sang on anvils and iron learned to hold a flame, water still boiled. It did so not by touching metal but by touching stone. Stone lifted from flame and given to water, stone that carried the sun of the fire into the hush of a bowl. This quiet transfer, glowing rock meeting liquid, hiss turning to breath, breath turning to simmer, was a kitchen before kitchens, a way to build soups, porridges, and broths when pot meant bark, skin, gourd, clay not yet fired hard, or a basket that should have burned but didn't, because water stood up and said, "I will protect what holds me." The lesson begins at the river. There you read stones by hand, smoothness from long travel, grain tight enough not to split, bodies dense enough to store heat, but not so sealed with unknown crystals that they burst when thirsty. You avoid fresh, water-sodden rocks and anything that smells of sulfur or shows glittering veins. River pebbles and cobbles, already trained by 1,000 warm and cool cycles, are safer companions than stones pulled wet from a marsh or pried from a cliff in the rain. Your palm is the first tool. Your patience, the second. The hearth, you season the stones. Not with herbs, but with heat applied gently. You sit them near the fire at first, not in it, letting moisture flee politely. Then you roll them closer, into the orange mail of the coals, and you listen. A stone that will betray you complains in little pings. A worthy one grays calmly and then glows under its skin. You learn to read color. Dull cherry is sweet. Angry white is a warning. Embered stones do not need to shout. They need to be through hot, warmed to their wet centers, holding a calm that can be lent without violence. While the stones are remembering the sun, you prepare the vessel. Leather bags sewn gut-tight, swollen with water. Bark bowls, birch especially, stitched and resin-sealed. Coiled baskets lined with a thin slurry of clay. gourds cut and scooped, their walls holding the logic of plants, and fired clay bowls that would crack in flame but will float in heat carried gently. The vessel is not asked to stand on coals. It is asked to receive. You set it on stable earth near the hearth, where ash cannot jump easily and hands can work slowly. You lay in the food that wants wet, grains that swell and surrender, dried meat that asks to be kind again, greens and roots that like to talk in water, stones of salt that will dissolve into company, now the transfer, a practice of steadiness. With a forked stick, antler tongs, or 2 green sticks pinching, you lift a glowing stone from the bed of coals. Your hand, wrapped in bark or folded skin, acts as memory and caution. The stone comes humming toward the bowl, and the water reaches up with a hiss, first a knife strike sound, then a silkier whisper as steam replaces panic. You lower the stone, you do not drop it. You slide it gently along the side, so the water shrouds it and ash that clings is rinsed off into clarity. The bowl does not scorch, because water, the good servant, carries heat into its own body and spreads it wide. The first stone wakes the water. The second persuades it. The third convinces it to simmer. This is not roiling boil. This is the steady murmur that keeps starch from sulking and meat from tightening in shock. When the song softens, you fetch another stone. When the soup grows eager, you wait and let it talk. You practice a rhythm, fireball, fireball, your tool's a metronome between worlds. If the stone begins to speak too sharply in the water, spalling in little crackles, you retire it to the fire's edge and invite a calmer one. The point is not heat but negotiated heat, enough to coax, never enough to break what should bend. What cooks like this? Grain learns kindness here. Cracked barley, wheat groats, millet, amaranth, wild rice, each swells to its own idea of tender, starches letting go of sharp corners. Pulses, split peas, wild vetches, lentils, find their long music. Roots, thin-sliced cattail, bulrush, wild onion, lily bulb, turnip, breathe out their bias for sweetness. Fish that would fall apart over coals holds in soup, its oils becoming a lacquer that wraps the tongue. Meat that would scorch on a spit forgives itself in broth, a shoulder cut down the seam, sinew turning to velvet without theatre. Even eggs will poach in a leaf cup floated on hot water if stones keep the bowl patient. Seasoning is small and steady. Salt is a handful rubbed between fingers over the bowl, not a fistful. Herb bundles, thyme, wild leek, yarrow, mint, spruce tips, go in tide, so you can lift them later like sentences that are finished. If you have fat, a spoon of it is a promise that flavors will stay with you and not run away to the sides. If you have ash, sifted and pale, it can hush a sourness, make beans feel older in a good way. And sometimes you add stone on purpose, a slab of saline rock, a pinch of gypsum, the mineral voice of a place singing under the food's melody. You skim with a carved wood ladle or the rim of a flat shell. You taste with the back of a spoon, not to scald your mouth, but to ask the stew to explain itself. Doneness is not a time. It is a texture, a grain that presses and sighs, a root that breaks like wet chalk, a scrap of meat that agrees to part ways when asked gently by a stick. Your ear helps. The pitch of simmering drops as starch thickens. Your nose helps more. The raw edges in the scent round off. Smoke stands back and lets broth speak. The spent stones cool in a second bowl or at the pit's edge, white with a pretty ash that falls away at a rub. You will not return them hot to the fire. You will let them memorize the shift, then warm them again slowly. A good stone lasts many feasts, corners softened by a career of kindness. When it finally cracks in two with a dignified sigh, you do not curse it. You put its halves at the hearth's edge to remember what they did and to keep holding a small warmth after meals. There are failures that teach. A bowl that leaks taught you to clay line better, to dry that clay longer near warmth, to bind your basket tighter before you make it wet. A stone that spalls loudly taught you to keep your face away and your hands slow. To dry stones first. To never trust a glittering seam. A soup that dulls into mud taught you to stir less, to add stones along the side so you do not beat the broth into panic, to use fewer starches at once. Water itself teaches. It punishes hurry but rewards persistence. Across the world, this technique wears local clothing. In the Arctic, seal blubber and heated stones turn snow country ingredients into something like a lullaby: fat, heat, and patience against a wind that never apologizes. Along rivers, willow bark bowls and gourd ladles make kitchens under cartonwood shade, stones moving like bright moons from fire to water and back. In the Great Plains, parfleche and rawhide bags, waterproof when wet, boil stews that taste of grassland and bison memory. In forests, birch bark kettles and spruce root stitching hold tea and fish soups long enough for stories to braid themselves correctly. On shores, soapstone bowls hug flame, but where they do not, baskets and stones and sea are enough. Science kneels quietly behind all this. Stone-specific heat. It stores energy without needing an arena to perform. Water's thermal inertia. It takes heat and makes it behave. Collagen's team of proteins unraveling at temperatures friendlier than athletic fires. Starches swelling and then surrendering to a lion tamer who speaks softly. Boiling with stones is not a hack. It is engineering with trust as the thermostat. There is beauty in the choreography. One person minds the fire, feeding, stirring, banking coal so the next stone will be ready with grace. Another tends the bowl, watching levels, adding water not in gulps but in ladle breaths, rescuing a tender root before it regrets staying. A third watches the children and the dogs and the wind. Meals like this teach roles without rank. Everyone does something essential. No one is more heroic than the stone that did not break. When metal finally arrived, the bronze that stayed, the iron that endured, people did not abandon stones. They remembered the principle that water likes mediators. Heavy clay pots hold heat quietly. Cast iron does the work of 10 stones in one piece. Ovens mimic dirt. Lids create pressure like a small, polite earth oven. Even on steel, good cooks move food nearer and farther, add heat and rest in waves. A pot that simmers is still a bowl that learned fire through something in between. Try a small echo, if you like, safely. Heat small, dry river stones slowly at the edge of a barbecue's coals. Set a thick ceramic bowl or a cast iron pot with water beside the heat, not on flames. Use tongs. Lower a glowing stone along the wall so it slides without splash. Step back for the first hiss. Feel the water grow sure of itself. Add cracked barley and a bay leaf and a pinch of salt. Add another stone when the song thins. Watch how little you need to do. This is technology that respects temperament. Yours, the water's, the food's. When it is ready, the soup will not brag. It will steam in small sentences. The bowl will warm your hands in a way that has nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with comfort. You will taste place, the stone's signature, the wood's paragraph in the smoke, the river's footnote. You will sit down, and others will come, because the smell knows the way to find them. You will ladle, and the first bowl will go to the elder without anyone saying so. You will notice, afterward, that the stones by the hearth look like moons that have finished a tide. You will thank them, if only by letting them cool with dignity. There is a season in every old kitchen when the question is not, what shall we eat tonight? But what will we be eating when the snow is stubborn and the wind has opinions? In that season, smoke becomes more than perfume. It becomes policy. Drying becomes a grammar. Together, cool smoke and moving air, salt and sun, careful slicing and patient tying, they turn brief abundance into long companionship. This is not spectacle. It is a quiet treaty with time. Drying came first, because wind was old before fire learned to stay. It begins with geometry and humility. You reduce thickness so a breeze can think with the meat. Strips are cut with the grain for strength, or across for tenderness, depending on whether you will carry them far or eat them soon. Fat is trimmed, not because fat is unwelcome. Fat is winter's candle, but because wet fat delays the lesson you're trying to teach. Be less water. Racks rise from poles, latticework of willow or peeled saplings, set where air walks freely, under the eaves, in the mouth of a cave, along a river that keeps its promises. Drying wants shade more than sun. Sun can be noble, but it is enthusiastic, and too much enthusiasm roughens the outside while the inside still negotiates. Shade with a breeze is kinder. It carries moisture away without alarming the surface. Flies are kept out with smoke or with sleeves of woven grass, or simply by height and wind. Nights are the test. If dew threatens to undo the day's work, the racks come in, or a small, polite fire is coaxed to keep the air honest. You learn to read a strip by pinch and bend. It should not snap like a grudge. It should not weep like a complaint. It should arc and sigh and remember its shape. Smoke arrives like a neighbor who knows the back gate. You do not invite flame to this party. Flame is a storyteller who hogs the room. You want the ghost of fire, cool smoke, never so hot that fat renders and drips, never so thin that it forgets to speak. The wood matters because wood is where the forest becomes flavor. Hardwoods are the old choir. Oak for depth, beech for calm, maple for a touch of round sweetness, alder for fish and delicacy, apple and cherry for a fruit you taste with your nose. Conifers are tricksters. Resin can preach too loudly, but a pinch of juniper can make venison remember mountains. A smokehouse in its earliest form is not a house. It is a frame that teaches air to behave. 4 posts, a roof that keeps arrogance, rain, out, sides of woven brush or hung mats that suggest a path rather than sealing it. The fire sits apart, off to one corner or in a low, lidded pit, so the smoke arrives cooled by distance. Hooks, bone, antler, bent greenwood, carry fish belly split and opened like pages, birds cleaned and brined, sausage ropes plaited with twine made of patience. The smell is not a punch. It is a quilt, meat, leaf, sweet wood, and the clean bitterness that keeps bacteria second-guessing themselves. Fish ask for special tact. Their oils are generous. Their flesh is modest. Salt first, because salt is a tutor, coarse grains rubbed in and then rinsed off, or a brine that feels like a small sea. Dry the surface so smoke can shake its hand. Hang with space between so each fish has its own thoughts. Alder and apple speak gently to rivers. Maple and beech whisper to lakes. Oak is for the sea, where boldness is appropriate. A whole day of cool smoke writes an essay you can read all winter. The skin a little glassy, the flesh firm without cruelty. A fragrance that makes the memory of boats feel near even when the coast is far. Meat learns the alphabet of preservation in longer sentences. There is the dry windway, jerky by another name, salted and dried, sometimes spiced with what a place knows, chili, pepper, wild onion, sumac. There is the smoke-dry way, where smoke is a pillar of the temple but not the god. Many, many hours of cool breath until the surface darkens and the inner water is aroma. And then the slow smoke way, where you are also cooking enough to change the truth of the fibers. Low, low heat and the long patience that turns rope into music. Each method is honest about its goal, to hold, to carry, to welcome a knife in January. Salt is the partner you court with respect. It pulls water out and asks microbes to choose a different town. Dry salting, packing in crystals, suits slabs and bellies. Brining, water and salt married, wraps around things with curves. Either way, the rule is clarity. Rinse when you should, dry when you must, never trap surface water under smoke. In some places, sugar joins the council, not to sweeten for the tongue but to sweeten for the bacteria, confusing them into slowness and, let us be kind, retirement. In other places, spice stands guard, pepper's clear voice, bay's ghost of laurels, garlic's handshake that lasts, drying and smoking make architecture out of the air. A narrow chimney draws too quickly. You widen it with a lazy bend. A roof that sits low keeps warmth too close. You lift it and remind the smoke to stroll. A wall that seals becomes a sulk. You lace it with gaps that say please and thank you. On still days, you court a draft with a second small fire set like a decoy. On days too bold with wind, you hang windbreaks, skins, mats, even people's bodies telling stories while they stand where they are most useful. Failures are teachers with good memory. Case hardening, the surface cured, the inside sad, teaches you about impatience and sun. Soot bitter smoke teaches you to feed coals, not flame, and to choose clean wood and to rake away char that shouts too loudly. Sour meat teaches you about too little salt, too close a crowd, too warm a room. Mold teaches you air must move. You build lattices and space hooks by fingers, not wishes. The lesson the old kitchens learned is not avoid error. It is design the day so error leaves because it is bored. Taste follows technique, and technique follows climate. In cold, dry places, the air itself is a smokehouse that never sleeps. You hang meat under eaves and the winter minds your racks like a strict aunt. In damp, green places, you add fire as spine and salt as law. Smoke must be seen and believed. Near coasts, seaweed joins as a mat and a veil, keeping moisture where it belongs and adding its own hymn. In forests, needles and cones find their way into the tray, adding evergreen punctuation when the paragraph needs it. All this is about keeping hunger in the black months from becoming fear. A larder is a mood. You build it the way you build a lullaby. Repeated phrases, gentle patterns, something for the hands to do while the mind looks out the window and makes peace with the weather. There are days devoted to slicing, days to hanging, days to tending coals, days to turning and testing. Children learn the bend test and the sniff test and the listening test. Yes, drying has a sound, quieter each day. Elders sit where drafts begin and tell how last year the wind found a new path around the smokehouse, and how this year you have outwitted it with a leafier wall. Storage is another chapter. Dried strips travel in skin bags with a dry leaf of bay or a twig of thyme tucked in as a poem. Smoked fish sleeps under cloth and breath cedar, or in boxes that remember the forest. Sausages hang where they can watch the family at table and feel like participants. Nothing is locked away without reason. Nothing is displayed for pride alone. Food that has learned to keep itself asks only to be kept honorably, at a temperature that minds it. In a place you visit often enough to notice if it wishes to speak, when the first deep cold arrives and the earth tightens its jaw. The smoke of earlier weeks leans down from the rafters and offers the taste of autumn to the tongue of winter. You slice, you soak sometimes, you stew, you fry briefly, you eat with bread that also knows how to wait. The meal tastes of planning and community and the good discipline of small chores done at the right hour. Smoke is present, but it is not the headline. It is the byline. This story was told with oak, with apple, with patience. With hands that didn't rush, modern kitchens. Armed with thermostats and sealed bags and hums of stainless machinery. Can still learn from this old friendship between air and time. Learn to favor gentle over forced. Learn to space as a seasoning, distance between pieces so flavor can circulate. Learn to choose wood as if you were choosing company. Some friends for depth, some for brightness, none for noise. And learn to keep a notebook of weather, your own smokehouse journal where you record that the alder was greener this year, that the wind turned trickster in late afternoons, that the fish asked for one more hour and thanked you for it.I in the end. Smoke and drying are not about hoarding food. They are about lengthening the meal until it reaches into months that would otherwise be lonely. They are about eating in January what September meant when it was generous. They are about the tenderness of continuance, how to keep going without panic, how to greet February with a strip of meat that tastes like a promise kept. You stand in the doorway of your not-a-house smokehouse, which is really just a thoughtful frame in the world. And the thread of blue air you let go this morning is still weaving into the trees. Racks creak softly like old ships. A child stands on tiptoe to sniff a fish and receives a solemn nod. Yes, it is time. You lift one piece and bend it and it speaks the right word. You have found a way to carry sunlight forward without trapping it. You have made summer into a bookmark you can find in the dark. Before mantle cranes and iron trivets, cooks learned to steer heat by distance. They discovered that flame is a singer best heard from the aisle, not the front row, that the sweetest notes of browning and the deepest softening of sinew happen just off the fire's boast. Out of this listening came two simple machines of patience, the spit, a stick that turns life into an even circle, and the tripod, three poles that hold a pot where coals can breathe. The grammar of turning a spit is nothing mystical, a straight green branch, hazel, willow, beech, shaved smooth. The bark left where grip helps, the ends carved to wedges. Sometimes a forked crotch serves to pin a joint. Sometimes a crosspin of smaller twig stops a bird from migrating along the shaft as fat teaches it to travel. In richer centuries, iron spatulas, and cranks appear, but the principle never changes. Slow rotation in patient air. Why turn? Because meat is many things at once: lean and fat, collagen and water, skin and membrane, and each part learns its lesson at a slightly different temperature. To hold a joint too close to flame is to force all lessons at once. To turn it gently in the heat beside the fire is to let each layer find its time. The surface dries just enough to brown. Fat warms to translucence, then liquefies. Collagen edges toward gel without ever seizing in panic. Turning is a peace treaty between haste and tenderness. You plant two forked sticks near the hearth lip, not in it, and lay the spit across their crooks. The fire proper sits to one side, not under, with its coals folded into a glowing wall. Between wall and meat is a small street of air where heat walks like a polite messenger. You begin to turn at the pace of storytelling, unhurried, regular, with pauses for emphasis. If a drip threatens a flare, you give it space. If a pallor lingers on one side, you lean that side toward the wall and let the coals argue it into color. Seasoning is the language of restraint. Salt first and last. Herbs tied in a basting brush of twigs and fat, bay, rosemary, yarrow, thyme, dipped in a bowl where drippings meet a spoon of something generous, marrow, butter, nut oil. The brush paints in brief, rhythmic strokes. You do not drown the surface. You glaze it, letting heat set each stroke before the next. Where metal spits arrive, prongs and clamps multiply. Where only wood exists, ingenuity does. Crustics pierce the bird's shoulders, twine binds legs to stave off splaying. Both worlds share the same rule: keep the shape compact so heat can think clearly. The wall of coals' direct flame is a show-off. Coals are negotiators. For spit roasting, you nurture a banked fire. Logs burn down and rake forward until their hearts glow without tantrum. You red the color, dull cherry for gentle browning, bright orange for bringing a pallid spot to redness, and you manage distance as if it were a spice. Move the spit closer to taste sear. Retreat it to invite rendering and rest. Good roasters build coals in bays, a hot bay to erase shyness, a mild bay where time can sing, a cooling bay that behaves like evening. Dripping fat is both hazard and gift. You set a drip pan, clay, stone hollow, even a scoop trench, in the floor between coals and roast. It catches the lesson falling. Into this, if fortune allows, go sliced onions, torn bread, clove-stabbed apples, a dash of sour, verjuice, wine, vinegar, herb stalks that would be rough in the mouth but elegant in a sauce. The pan lives in the heat's eddies, picking up sunburst and smoke. A turn of the spit rains flavor into it. Trenches soaked from this pan feed a hunger that knives can't satisfy. Failures teach without scolding. A roast that blisters too quickly was bullied by flame. You rake the coals down, lay a thin quilt of ash, increase the street of air. Pale meat that refuses to brown needs time at the wall, a patient minute nearer the glow. A bird whose thigh lags behind its breast is telling you to trust tighter and angle the spit so dark meat courts more heat. The best roasting looks like nothing dramatic. The drama happens inside, fiber relaxing, juices relocating, skins tightening to glass. The tripod and the quiet sun. The tripod is the spit's quiet sibling. 3 poles, green and sound, not dead or punky, are lashed at the head with a figure 8 of bark strip or rawhide thong. Spread and settled into the ground, the tripod becomes a small sky from which a pot can hang, a small sun, bed of coals, beneath it. Height is a thermostat. A few finger widths change turns simmer into murmur, murmur into warmth. What lives under the tripod? Porridges that prefer a calm. Stews that need time to braid. Teas that bloom at the border between hot and scalding. Custards and puddings in covered bowls nudge toward comfort rather than a boil. The tripod makes zones, directly above the heart coals for waking a pot, a little off for sustaining, farther yet for holding. You can swing the pot out to stir, in to encourage, or aside to serve. The poles themselves, when they dry and learn the song of the kitchen, creak messages about weight and redness. Fire management is the tripod secret. You do not keep a single bonfire sulking under the pot. You maintain 2 or 3 small beds. One is on duty. One is being born. One is going to sleep. You feed with split wood, not logs, and you learn to read smoke as a timetable. Blue and thin, hot and clean, white and thick, young and sappy. The pot speaks back. When its song lifts to chatter, you raise it or thin the coals. When it falls to silence, you honor it with a few embers nudged inward like coins slid across a table. Tripod cookery is also about covers. A lid turns a pot into a cloud catcher. With a lid on, steam rains back. With a lid off, steam tells you secrets and carries harshness away. Sometimes you invert a shallow bowl over a flat cake dough set on a tile near the coals. An upside-down oven, a field cousin of cloches and bells. Sometimes you mound embers on top of a lidded pot, a Dutch oven logic older than Dutch, so heat arrives from both heavens and earth. Meat, bird, fish, 3 turns of patience, a leg of venison. Well-trust thrives in a 2-hour conversation with a coal wall. You begin farther than you think. Let the surface learn what warm means. Only when colour shows do you flirt with nearer heat. Bastes are sparse at first, then more frequent as the skin tightens and will accept them. You listen for the fat's tone, at first sharp and eager, later lower and contented. Rest is not optional. It is part of cooking. 10 minutes under a tent of bark or cloth returns juice to map and map to meaning. A goose or duck asks for slyness. Its fat is a treasury that ruins the fire if spilled all at once, so you prick the fat pad under the wing and tilt the spit a touch, letting fat find the pan rather than the coals. Hotter moments are brief, used to glass the skin. Most of the time, you keep to the cooler bay and let rendering be geometry. Citrus rinds in the pan, bitter greens in the last bastings, and a pinch of smoke from fruitwood turn richness into laughter instead of sermon. A whole fish has 2 enemies, collapse and dryness. You give it a reed cage, 2 lattices pinned together, or stitch it loosely into a leaf envelope. Salt early. Heat it beside the coals so skin browns while flesh stays shy. Turn the cage, not the fish. When the spine eases from the flesh and the cheek lifts with no complaint, call the plate. A flick of pan juices and a handful of herbs that knew cold water in the morning are better than any sauce that took an afternoon hostage. Women, men, children, fire roasting, and tripod work were rarely solo performances. One person watches coals, the steward of temperament. One turns the spit, the steward of rhythm. One minds the pot, the steward of patience. And one becomes the bridge, fetching water, slicing herbs, keeping dogs hopeful but honest, telling a story at a speed that matches the turns. In many places, women ran these theatres of restraint. In others, jobs braided without fuss. The point was not who held the stick. The point was that everyone learned distance, from heat, from hurry, from pride. A small machinery of flavour tools multiply gently. A crane, a swinging arm of greenwood, lets a heavy pot move from hot to warm with a single thought. A windbreak of stone knees the draught just enough to keep smoke from being rude. A reflector, a half wall of flat stones or wet clay, throws heat back onto a roast's shy side without dragging it closer. A chain with notches, a peg with holes, a wedge under a fork support, each makes the kitchen adjustable. And adjustability is another word for kindness. Fat that drips into a thoughtful pan becomes bread's memory. Bread toasted on a stick over the pan steals a little. Onions browned in it tell every other ingredient how to grow up. If you have wine, a splash. If you do not, a splash of water from a wooden spoon does the same humility, lifting sticky stories from the pan into the sauce's parliament. The modern Echo gas grill can be made honest, coals or burners to one side, food to the other, a drip tray that is not an afterthought, a hand held above the grate to read heat in breaths, 1 breath, sear bay, 3 breaths, roast bay. A camp with only a fire and a few branches can still produce a dinner that understands restraint. The lesson is distance and rhythm. You are not seizing. You are convincing. Turners in any age learn to look without staring. They stand where smoke is a tutor, not a punishment. They taste with fingers, for crust, and ears, for fat, and eyes, for colour, and leave thermometers to the final word, not the first. They know that a roast that smells ready often needs 5 more easy minutes, and that a stew that has said yes to salt may still want a quiet no from acid. Before fireplaces and chimneys taught smoke where to go, cooks learned to make water and air carry kindness. Not the roar of a boil or the brag of a flame, but the quiet work of steam and poaching, methods that move heat through food with a patience food remembers. Steaming is air made wet and gentle. Poaching is water persuaded to hold steady just below its shout. Together, they are the oldest courtesies in the kitchen. The ways you keep shape and color and tenderness without asking muscles to panic or leaves to faint. The oldest sauna, leaves and basket steaming, begins with leaves. The land offers wrappers that do more than contain. They perfume and protect. They drip their own small rain back into what they hold. They make an oven out of a blanket. Banana, taro, reed, cattail, grape, cabbage, corn husk. Even clean grass in tight sheaves. Each says the same thing in a local accent. I will keep moisture where it belongs. You make a bed of leaves in a basket or on a lattice of sticks above a pot that is thinking about boiling but has decided to practice restraint. More leaves go over, and a lid, another basket, a clay plate, an upturned bowl, becomes a humble sky. Inside this dome, heat arrives as light rain, not as thunder. Fish holds its manners and does not fray. Greens glow deeper instead of graying. Dumplings swell and set without turning rubbery. Tubers soften to sweetness without shedding their dignity into the water below. Where metal steamer inserts are strangers, ingenuity is host. A ring of stones in the pot lifts a platform of anything breathable. Woven reeds, a grid of twigs, a loose mat of stems tied with grass. The waterline is set just low enough to not lick the platform, so steam rises, touches, returns. On the platform, packets of leaf-wrapped fish with a sprig of herb. Cakes of ground grain padded into neat ovals. Mushroom caps holding chopped greens. A pile of tender shoots that will shrink to exactly the mouthful you hoped for. Condensation is the hidden cook. A domed lid catches steam and lets it rain back where it is needed. Flip a flat lid and it drips at the edges. Choose a lid with a peak, even a small stone tied in a cloth at the center, and the rain returns to the middle where the food waits. In some places, cooks rub the inside of a lid with fat or leaf to keep droplets from clinging too rudely. In others, they line the lid with clean cloth that drinks the extra and releases it more slowly. Like a small cloud made careful, poaching, the kindness between raw and boiling is a trumpet. Poaching is a flute. It calls for water at a shiver, not a shout. Tiny blips like fish kisses at the surface, a subtle motion under the skin. This is the right climate for eggs, which protest violence by toughening. For fish, whose albumin rises and sets like polite snow in the broth if you do not frighten it. For offal that yields slowly. For fruit that wants to hold its shape while its cell walls learn sweetness to hold a poach without a thermometer, you learn human measures. Slip a finger briefly into the liquid. Clean and brave hot but not intolerable is wrong. Too cool is wrong. Comfortably very warm is close. And a tiny wisp of steam that does not sting your wrist says yes. Or you watch the breathing of the water. A quiver, not a tremble. Little pearls of air climbing from the pot seam, not the rolling pomp of a full boil. If impatience pushes, you lift the pot away for a minute, or ladle in a spoon of cooler liquid, or feed the fire a smaller thought. Poaching liquids are stories you can drink later. Water agrees to be soup if you give it something to remember. A slice of onion, a stalk of green, a coin of ginger, a bruise of garlic, a handful of herbs tied in a string like a sentence you can remove. Vinegar, wine, sour whey from cheese making, a squeeze of citrus, all are acids that respect protein, tightening it just enough to keep it whole while keeping it tender. Salt is non-negotiable. It seasons the food and raises the carriage of the water, helping it hold heat and flavor like a proper host. For fish, a shallow pan and just enough liquid to nest the fillets are wise. You do not drown what you mean to serenade. For eggs, a deeper swirl so the whites can wrap themselves like a shawl. A spoon's swirl makes a vortex that cradles the yolk, but only if the water is properly modest. For chicken or small game, a court bouillon, vegetables and herbs, lets collagen melt without fury. Cooling the meat in the liquid afterward is half the tenderness, a rest that returns juices to the map, sand and steam. Deserts making kitchens where water is shy, sand becomes a steamer and an oven both. A clay pot half buried in hot sand, its lid sealed with dough or clay, holds a moist interior climate made by the food itself. Roots, wrapped in damp cloth or leaf, planted in a shallow sand trough close to a bed of coals, steam in their own breath as heat travels through grain by grain. Anyone who has burned their feet knows. Sand stores heat with quiet determination. Cooks turn that mischief into mercy, channels dug to bring warmth near, not under. Lids that send steam back. Timing that respects the slow travel of heat through earth. On coasts, seaweed makes steam where water meets fire. Stones heated, seaweed piled, fish laid atop, more seaweed over, a top or mat to seal. A shore-day clambake is a leaf steamer with salt built in. The liquid that collects at the bottom is not wasted. It is ladled over bread or into a broth or simply tilted back as a taste of the shore with grit settled and pride humbled, dumplings, cakes, and puddings. Starches that love weather starch and steam are friends. In every kitchen without an oven, and many with one, there are dumplings that learn their shape over vapor. Rice balls, millet ovals, wheat pillows, barley clouds. Baskets stack like little towers. Cloths are stretched like drumheads and smeared with thin batter to make crepes that steam cook in seconds. Puddings in tied cloths bob in water just below boiling, their crumbs knit by heat and time. These foods are architecture, protein set into scaffolds of starch, moisture captured and persuaded to stay. A tied cloth pudding, a bag pudding, is a good example of old engineering. The cloth is buttered or oiled, dusted with flour or crumbs, filled with a batter thick enough to remember itself, tied with room to swell, and lowered into a pot that barely trembles. The waterline must sit below the knot so the pudding does not drink more than it gives. The lid stays on, because steam is part of the binding. When it emerges, it is wet at first, but then steam escapes. The surface sets, and a sauce, often built from the very liquid it cooked in, brings the lesson full circle. Green things kept green steaming and poaching preserve color and shape when that matters. A handful of nettles over steam becomes food instead of sting and keeps a springtime green that a boil would bury. Wild herbs, sorrel, lamb's quarters, dandelion, wilt to sweetness without going sour in attitude. Young onions and leeks, laid across a steamer and covered, soften to a perfume that makes anything below grateful. When you treat a leaf with kindness, it repays by staying itself. Even in meat cookery, steam saves virtues. A tough cut that you do not dare brown, because smoke is not welcome indoors, can be steam braised, a splash of liquid, a tight lid, a low fire, and hours. The meat emerges without crust but with integrity, its fibers persuaded, not bullied. The sauce tastes like agreement between bone and leaf, not a custody dispute. Tools that whisper you do not need furniture to steam, but good tools make quiet easier. A trivet, 3 stones, 3 small feet on a pot, create space for water to speak without touching. A lattice of sticks becomes a platform. A cloth stretched over a pot makes a drum on which batter becomes a sheet in seconds. The cloth is lifted by its corners and the sheet peels off, rolled while it still remembers being flexible. A conical lid returns rain to the center. A flat lid teaches you to rotate food gently so the edges do not dry while the middle gets wet. You learn to listen. Steam rattling the lid is too eager. Lower the heat or lift the lid for a second to let the excitement leave. Steam that never fogs the lid is too shy. A finger of fuel or a handful of embers tucked closer under the pot gives it courage. Poaching liquid that trembles into bubbles needed a counsel to calm down. A few breaths off the heat, a stone dropped in to absorb impatience. A momentary addition of cool liquid. Failures that teach kindness over steamed greens teach you seconds matter. Bitterness blooms if you linger. Fish that breaks taught you the liquid shouted. Eggs that feather taught you to keep vinegar's hand lighter or the water cooler. Dumplings that sweat when served wanted a cloth rest to shed extra steam before meeting sauce. A pudding that sinks needed a thicker batter, or a slower spasm from the pot. Or the grace of not slamming a door while it decided who it was going to be. Each misstep writes a note for next time. Leave the lid alone. Don't peek until peeking saved the day. Use a timer only as a junior partner to eyes and nose. Trust that rest, a minute off heat under cover, finishes cooking more reliably than 10 more loud seconds on the fire. Taste, texture, and the politics of gentle steamed foods have a clean edge. The grain tastes like grain. The leaf like leaf. The fish like fish but kinder. Poached meats cut with less drama. Juices staying on the plate long enough to meet bread as a friend. Sauces made from poaching liquid carry a memory of restraint. They are not reductions that shout. They are translations that keep the grammar of what was cooked inside them. Gentle methods also include more people. Those whose teeth mind toughness, those whose bellies prefer calm, those whose days have already had enough shouting. Steamed and poached suppers meet them halfway. In an age before chimneys, this mattered in rooms where smoke was rationed and peace was flavour. To modern echo, you can try set 3 smooth stones in a pot and pour water to just below their tops. Lay a lattice of sticks across or set a plate on the stones. Bring the water to a shiver. Place leaf-wrapped fish on the platform. Cover with a bowl that domes. Watch the breath at the lid's edge. Adjust until it is steady but soft. While it cooks, warm a little water with a sprig of herb and a slice of lemon for a poaching echo on the side. Drop in a pear, peeled, and let it bathe until a skewer says yes. Serve the fish and pear with the juices they made. Notice how much was accomplished with almost nothing. Or stretch a clean cloth over a pot, tie it, and ladle a thin batter onto the fabric to make a steam crepe. Cover with an upturned bowl to trap vapor. In a minute, lift a corner, peel, and roll with a spoon of herb cheese. Everything about this is old and new at once. A pot, a cloth, water turning to air turning to food. Die in a world before fireplaces, steaming and poaching were not lesser arts. They were polite technologies, ways to get dinner to yes without bruising anything on the way. They made rooms breathable and meals coherent. They remind us, now, that the gentlest heat is often the most persuasive, and that a lid, a leaf, and a pot of water can teach as much as any oven if you let them. Long before chimney throats learned to pull smoke, cooks learned something quieter from a fire. Ash is not only aftermath. The pale powder under last night's glow holds minerals, potash, carbonates, a whisper of lime, that can change food without shouting. In rooms and camps without fireplaces, water was turned a little alkaline with clean wood ash or burnt shell. That mild chemistry softened skins, coaxed nutrition free, banished bitterness, and made the tough behave. This was cooking by persuasion, not by heat alone. Soaking, rinsing, steeping, an arrangement between wood, water, and grain ash water. A kitchen made from yesterday's fire to make ash water. You sift yesterday's clean, hardwood ash, oak, beech, maple, fruitwood, until it is as fine as thought. No painted wood, no mystery fuel. A handful goes into a jar or gourd. Warm water covers it. The mixture is stirred and then left to settle. Clearer liquid above the grey cloud is poured off. This is a gentle lie, a kitchen-strength kindness. Stronger lie lives with soap makers. Cooks want something the tongue could forgive if a drop remained after a good rinse. Why bother? Because alkaline water changes the rules. It loosens hulls, breaks the pride of pectin, and teaches starch new manners. It is the difference between grain that fights teeth and grain that says yes, grains that learn to listen, hominy and cousin's corn, maize. In its toughest dress, whole kernels in their jackets can be made into hominy when steeped in warmish water, then rinsed and rubbed. The hulls slip like a stubborn thought finally clarified. The germ loosens. The kernel swells and becomes tender at lower heat. Hidden inside this change is nutrition set free. Niacin unlocks so bodies do not forget themselves in winter. Kitchens that learned ashwater corn taught generations to be well, not just full. The process is a day's companionship. You warm the ash water to comfortable, steam that fogs a wrist but does not sting. Kernels bathe, stir, rest. Now and then you rub one between fingers. When the skin gives, it is time. You pour the liquid off, never to soil or stream. Lie is polite only when diluted. Flood the bowl with clean water, rub and rinse, until the grain is itself again but better. It cooks in a fraction of the time, keeps its shape in stews, and carries sauce like a good friend carries a secret, firmly and without dropping it other places. Millets and sorghum receive a brief alkaline kiss to shorten stubborn cooking. Acorns are leached of bitterness first in ash water, then in many clear rinses, bitter tannins depart. The nut remembers it is food. Beans that had been skeptical soften, their skins reluctant less often. The principle repeats. A small tilt of pH and time falls in love with tenderness, fruit, greens. And bitterness taught to behave bitter greens and fruits carry defenses, tannins and acids that protect the plant and sometimes hinder the eater. Cooks defeated them with patience, blanching, soaking, or with a nudge from ash. Olives in some traditions bathe in weak lye to shed their scowl. Then they rinse and rest and are reborn as food. Wild mustard, nettles, dock, steamed or blanched, learn sweetness. A pinch of alkaline water in the blanch makes colour hold and mouths grateful. Even citrus peel candies for feast days soften more kindly when their first blanch includes a trace of ash memory. The pith releases its grip and bitter becomes bright. Sweetness without sugar. The alchemy of pectin and starch alkali changes pectin, the glue in plants. Too much and things fall apart rudely. Just enough and chickpeas keep their skins from turning papery. Dried fruit plumps with less sulk, and tough jams cook shorter while staying bright. In some old camps, a splash of mildish water in a pot of dried apples helped them soften clear to the core, the difference between leathery and yielding. With grains, a trace in porridge made from whole broken kernels, not flour, can keep the edges round. The spoon trailing cream instead of paste. Lutefisk, lye. And the warning label there is a stern cousin to kitchen lye, lye proper. Strong enough to tan hides and clean iron. Some northern kitchens made a tradition of softening dried fish in lye, then rinsing it honest again, lutefisk. Here the line between edible and inedible is a matter of discipline. Correct strength, correct time, correct rinses. It is a good reminder. Alkalinity is power. Power wants supervision. Our camp kitchen stays on the gentle side. Ash water you would be willing to touch. Always followed by the liturgy of many rinses. Always tested by taste and fingers, peels, skins. And the easy way out alkaline dips make peeling tomatoes and almonds easier when fire is scarce indoors. Tomatoes pricked and rolled briefly in warmish water, then rinsed and skinned, keep more flesh than those bullied by flame. Almonds soaked in warm alkaline water let go of jackets with a pinch and a smile. Fava beans, split old fellows, shed their grey coats more willingly, leaving the green hearts for stews where smoke is forbidden by weather clay pots. Lime, and the long gamesome clays drink and crack with certain foods. Cooks found that lime, from burnt shell or stone, in cooking water mitigated sourness that would bully a pot, and that lime itself could firm fruits for preserves. Pumpkin slivers. Green figs, citrus wedges steeped in lime water took on a delicate snap, then were sugared or honeyed when fortune allowed. In lean years, the firming alone was pleasure, the sensation of bite in a world of soft porridge. Safety, rinse, respect every alkaline practice ends with water. Rinse until rinse seems redundant, then rinse once more. Taste a kernel and a drop of its cooking water. No slip of soap on the tongue. No odd slickness on fingers. Ash water is a tool, not an ingredient. It visits. It does not move in. Ash itself must be clean, from known, untreated wood. Sifted sow coal and char do not bring smoke where it does not belong. Strength is kept modest. If your fingers feel slimy in the solution, dilute. If a leaf loses color at a touch, dilute. The aim is kind chemistry, a nudge, not a shove. The flavor of kindness foods touched correctly by alkali do not taste of soap. They taste of clarity. Hominy tastes like corn reintroduced to water. Acorns become quiet, more nut than bark. Beans turn from belligerent to civil, their skins whispering, not shouting. Greens shine, literally and figuratively. In a kitchen without fireplace draft, where boiling is a negotiation with smoke and walls. These transformations save fuel and shorten heat, because softened foods ask less of fire and more of time spent soaking while stories are told. how it looked in a day dawn, sifting ash, setting jars. Midday, warming the lye water and introducing corn. Afternoon, rubbing kernels in a wide bowl, hulls lifting like husks of conversation. Children running rinsing water to the edge of the garden where lye will be welcomed by soil in moderation. Evening, a pot of quick-cooking hominy stew at the brazier, smoke thin and polite, flavour it with drippings from a small roast, a handful of dried herbs, a rennet of onions softened in the pan. At the edge, a shallow dish of acorn mush transformed from stern to sweet nut by a morning of leaching and a final splash of cream if luck visited. The modern ecu can taste the principle safely today. For hominy at home, use food-grade pickling lime, calcium hydroxide, or baking soda for a gentle echo, a teaspoon or 2 per quart of water, warmed. Soak whole dried corn until skins slip. Rinse like a vow. Simmer to tenderness. For greens, blanch with a pinch of baking soda only if you must, and just for seconds, then rinse and shock so color holds and texture survives. For preserves, try a lime water soak for firm fruits before sugaring. Rinse to honesty, then cook low and kind. What matters most is the attitude, that cooking is more than heat. It is also water, minerals, and time arranged. Fire begins the conversation. Ash, in small, respectful doses, finishes it in places where stirring a pot all day would smoke the room and steal the afternoon to iron a world before fireplaces. Alkaline cookery was an indoor gift. Fewer roaring boils. More soaks that saved fuel, gentler stews, grains that cooperated. It is a reminder that sometimes yesterday's ashes are today's kitchen wisdom, and that the softest tools in the room, water changed by a pinch of earth, can make the biggest difference to comfort and health. Before chimneys gave fire a permanent address, good cooks learned to use what fire leaves behind. Not the brave orange of flame, not even the steady red of coals, but the long, generous afterglow, stones still warm to the palm, ash that remembers, water that keeps its breath, clay that radiates a hush of heat for an hour after the last feed. This is the craft of residual heat, setting food and pot in the right place at the right moment so dinner finishes itself while the room becomes more livable. The map of warmth after the fire a live hearth has zones. A dying hearth has contours, hot, warm, kind, and merely friendly. You learn them with your body. Palm held a handspan above the spot, 3 slow breaths, warm. 5, kind. 7, friendly, knuckles near the stone, never on, cheek turned to feel the draft. Stones at the edge of yesterday's fire hold a mood like late afternoon. The ash bed is a duvet you can pull forward or back to throttle breath. A pot moved to the shoulder of warmth becomes a thinker rather than a talker. Cooks made literal maps in their heads. This flat stone keeps tea warm. That corner finishes porridge without turning it to paste. That ring of pebbles around the brazier is where beans get their last 5 minutes. Children learn the boundaries with bread in hand. Set it there to stay soft. Not there, or it sulks. Carryover. What food does off the flame meat, grain, root? Each keeps cooking after you move it away. The word modern chef's use is carryover. Older kitchens called it common sense. A spit roast haunch, taken off shy of done, climbs a few degrees while it rests under a cloth, redistributing its juices. A pot of barley removed at murmur becomes silk at the rim while starch settles properly. A fish pulled when the spine almost surrenders will agree a minute later with no urging. Residual heat is polite persuasion. No shouting, no seizing, all consent. Knowing this, cooks stopped early on purpose. They trusted the rest. A rule, taught in quiet kitchens: if it smells ready, give it 1 gentle minute away from fire, not on it. The minute saves 10 of repair. Ash as blanket, stone as hard ash is not just evidence. It is insulation. A small clay pot set in a hollow and tucked up with warm ash becomes a haybox before hayboxes were fashioned. Stews finish, legumes soften, milk infusion steep. The ash does not scorch, it slows. You can nudge ash closer or brush it back to tighten or loosen the embrace. In winter, a pot buried up to its shoulder by the evening glow is breakfast without grief. Stones that basked by the coals become travelling radiators. A warmed river stone slipped into a lidded pot keeps a stew lively. A pair of hot stones in a folded cloth turns a basket into a warming drawer for flatbreads. A slab leaned near the bed makes the room forget a draft. The logic is simple. Mass first, then time. Heat the thing that kindly stores, then let it do what flame cannot. Be present without needing attention, lidding, nesting, and the small earth oven lids multiply residual heat. A domed lid turns a cooling pot into a self-feeding cloud. Condensate returns the warmth as rain. Flavors stay in the family. Two pots nested, a smaller within a larger with a breath of space and a cloth between, create a gentle bain-marie that asks almost nothing of fire. Dough proofed under an upturned bowl near embers forgets the cold. Custard set in after heat. The pot first kissed the brazier, then retired to a ring of warm stones. Emerged smooth because no boil was invited to bruise them, clay remembers. A tagine-like lid or a thick clay casserole, once warmed, rules its own weather. Remove from flame just before done and trust the clay to finish. The shape and mass make the sentence complete. The night shift. Cooking while you sleeping rooms that ration smoke, people gave the night some cooking to do. Porridges were brought to a brief simmer, covered, and set in ash so breakfast would be kind. Beans were brought just to the first sigh, then buried in warmth. By morning they spoke softly and needed only salt and herb. Milk steeped with bark and seed cooled on a stone still warm enough to keep the cream thinking. In the morning, it tasted like a small dessert even for stern days. Bread stretched their rest in the afterglow. Shaped loaves took a nap under a cloth and a bowl near the dying fire. Then baked at dawn under a dome when the room woke. Meat too had a night craft, a tough cut. Par-cooked at noon, cooled in its own juices near warm stones. Then finished quickly the next day in fresh coals. Saving fuel and smoke both, warm corners, safe rooms after heat made rooms breathable. Instead of a rolling boil that bullied air, cooks favoured one strong moment of heat and a long coast. The brazier could be dimmed. The roof hole could sigh rather than beg. A pot that murmurs in afterheat asks less of lungs. Children sleep easier when the glow is glow and not glare. Elders tell longer stories when they aren't policing sparks. Finishing touches without flamesome flavours prefer the shoulder of heat. Onions browned earlier release sweetness into a pan on the warm stones. The fond loosens with a splash of water or broth without smoke. A sauce reduced to the edge of meaning is held just shy of thickness so it doesn't turn sulky. Herbs bruised with salt in a wooden bowl bloom on the warm rim of the hearth. The oils rise without losing colour or spirit. Even tea behaves better in afterheat. Water brought once to the brink is slid aside. Leaves meted away from the fire. Bitterness never finds the pot. Coffee roasted at noon finishes its thinking in a warm jar. Tomorrow's brew tastes less like hurry. The physics with its shoes off residual heat is mass doing its job, thermal inertia. Stone, clay, water, each keeps a promise to hold energy and release it slowly. Ash reduces convection, creating still air that acts like another lid. Lids turn steam into a closed loop, adding latent heat without eating oxygen or patience. None of this needed a word in old kitchens. It needed habit. But knowing the words now can make the habit feel like craft rather than accident. Failures that grow wisdom if your stew splits in afterheat, the fire you used beforehand was proud. Next time, stop sooner and salt later. If porridge crust's too hard where it sat, the ash hug was thin. Give it another finger of cover or tuck a cloth between pot and ash. If beans sulk by morning, you buried them in story but not enough warmth. Add a warmed stone next time. If bread overproofs near the glow, move it one stone farther. Distance is seasoning, social rhythm, not just technique. Residual heat let people live while dinner finished. Mending, carving, teaching letters to a child with a stick and sand. The last hour of cooking belonged to something else. Hospitality widened. A guest who arrived late still received food properly done because afterheat had been tending it all along. The cook was less a firefighter, more a gardener of warmth. A modern echo you can try on a grill or fire pit. Create a cool shoulder of stones or bricks. When stew or grains first simmer, move them to the shoulder, lid on, and walk away for 20 minutes. Return to find them polished, not bullied. Heat a thick pot, then turn the flame off and set your custard or rice to finish with the pot's warmth. Stir once, cover, let it coast. For bread, preheat a heavy lid, Dutch oven top. Once the loaf begins to color, kill the heat and leave it closed for 5 to 10 minutes. The crust sings. The crumb evens. For beans, bring to a boil, cover, wrap the pot in a dry towel, or place in an insulated hay box, and let afterheat do the long work. The point isn't asceticism. It's manners, with air, with fuel, with food. Residual heat is the quietest partner in the room, and often the most faithful. It makes meals that taste settled, rooms that breathe, and evenings that feel owned rather than survive die in the age before fireplaces. This was not an emergency trick. It was the default. Light little, heat wisely, let mass carry the rest. It is still available, for the price of attention. Before fireplaces learned to tame smoke, many of the best meals were made without flame at all. The cooks of quiet rooms turned to a technology as old as breath, fermentation, the art of asking friendly microbes to cook for you. In crocks and skins, in berry jars and cool corners, people salted, soured, and cultured their food until it changed species of flavor, sharper, safer, deeper, and often softer to the body. This was heatless cooking, a partnership with invisible workers who love calm, shade, and attention more than spectacle. A room that knows where to breathe. Fermentation begins with place. Not a laboratory, just a corner that minds its temperature, a shelf out of sun, a floor that stays reasonably cool, a roof that doesn't drip, a draft that's more habit than wind. People learn the geography of their houses by the way crocks behaved. The north wall that never lied, the cellar pit that stayed patient, the eaves that listened to the weather but didn't repeat it. Jars and skins lived there like quiet pets, fed with salt and water and the day surplus, patted and checked, never nagged. Vessels were simple and smart, glazed crocks with shoulders to hold a water seal. Heavy jars buried to the rim in cool ground. Skins that breathed a little. Wooden tubs seasoned with 1,000 meals worth of memory. The lids were never bolts. They were invitations that kept flies out and gases honest. A stone, a leaf, a wooden cap, a plate with a weight, each said under, not above, because fermentation loves a calm blanket. Salt, the gatekeeper. Salt is fermentation's traffic cop. Too little and strangers walk in. Too much and friends can't do their jobs. The old hands didn't measure in grams. They measured with palms and memory, a handful per small tub, more for fish than for cabbage, less for cucumbers than for beets. The aim was never brine that stung like the sea. It was water that felt intelligent on the tongue, salty enough to ask rot to leave, gentle enough to let lactic acid bacteria unpack their tools. You make brine like a polite letter, dissolve salt in hot water, cool it to room, pour until vegetables sigh and sink. Or you dry salt, rub salt into sliced things until their own sap wakes, then push them down with a weight and wait for a lake to form. Either way, the rule is coverage. Food below brine, air above brine, a leaf or cloth between, a stone that presses just enough to keep mischief from learning to swim, sour by nature. Lactic fermentation. Lactic acid bacteria are the kitchen's old saints, tolerant, clean, and useful. Feed them plant sugars at room temperature, and they repay with tang that saves. Cabbage becomes sauerkraut or its cousins everywhere. Shreds salted, pounded gently until their sap flows, then tamped into a jar where they sigh out bubbles like friendly fish. Cucumbers, beets, carrots, radishes, all trade their raw awkwardness for a fermented poise, crispness that obeys the bite, sour that isn't a slap, a briny perfume that proposes soup, salad, stew, or a piece of cold bread with a smear of fat. The work is mostly listening to the jar. Early days, a light froth, a carbonated whisper. Midweek, the brine learns to smell like edibility clarified. After, a calm that says, move me somewhere cooler. Skim once if you must, but don't fuss. Fermentation dislikes anxiety. You taste with a clean finger or stick. When your face folds into a natural nod, yes, that, it's done enough to eat while it keeps. Fish, meat, and the deep notes. The smell of old preservation is not a joke. It is a lesson. Salt fish layered with brine and weighted in a cool place becomes a keepsake you can pan-fry, stew in milk, or shred into a pot with onions and roots. Cured meats, not smoked but pickled in brine, learn a ham-adjacent honesty long before chimney hooks existed. The key is cool and healthy brine, clear, not cloudy, smelling like the sea at dawn, not the harbour at dusk. Spices, if available, bay, pepper, coriander, add diplomacy from scraps, bones, innards, heads, come liquid seasonings that civilizations reinvented without calling each other first. Fish and salt joined and left to transmute into amber sauces you use by the drop. The science is proteolysis. The spirit is patience and strict salt. A small jar kept out of sun, stirred now and then, decanted when clear, becomes a comet you can trail through soups and porridges. Do not mistake this for rot. Rot refuses rules. Fermentation follows them, souring dairy, clabber, yogurt, cheeses that behave. Milk is already almost a sauce. Microbes turn it into a map. Leave fresh, clean milk in a cool, safe corner and it clabbers, thickens into a tender gel you spoon with honey, herbs, or salt. Warm it gently, and curds rise. Strain them in a cloth and salt them into farmer's cheese. Cultures passed hand to handmade yogurt in clay pots set near embers, lids on, shawls around. Milk held at a human warmth for a night, then moved to a cooler shelf to set like a kind thought. Kefir-like grains travelled households like pets that pay rent. Buttermilk after churning behaved like a mild acid for dough and a starter for more milk. Cheeses without presses wore belts of salt and thyme. A small round salted and turned daily in a basket learned to breathe. A wrapped fresh cheese, hung under eaves, took on a firmness that fried well and held its shape in stews. If you had only a roof hole and a brazier, you still had a dairy room. It was the spot of steady temperature and careful shade that your hands learned by habit. Sourdough, bread that remembers yesterday leaven, came from air and hands. A paste of flour and water lived in a jar. It bubbled when fed. It slept when cold. It tasted like the room's surname. You reserved a scoop from each bake and returned it to the jar with more flour and water. The jar answered with kindness the next day. In chimneyless houses, leaven sat near warmth but never on it, close to the brazier's shoulder, never its crown. Under a cloth. Away from draughts. Doughs rose in bowls with a wet cloth or leaf to keep air from crusting them. When ready, they baked under bells and bowls as earlier told. The flavour was a community event. Bacteria and yeasts, grain and hand, room and time. All writing their names in the crumb, grains that fermented drink and food water that wanted purpose found it in kvass-like drinks, bread or malted grain soured lightly with wild cultures. Then drunk as food that used to be soup. Sour porridges, oat, millet, maize, soaked a day or two, cooked slow the next morning to become supple and bright, a breakfast that felt awake. In warm places, palm saps and fruit pulps turned themselves toward wine and vinegar with little more than a vessel and a cloth. The vinegars then served the kitchen as cleaners, picklers, and quick sauces that answered fat with nerve, where molds were friendly and wisdom grew from observation. People made pastes, beans and grain salted, inoculated by the house's own benevolent spores, cured into umami bricks you could shave or dissolve. The exact fungi had local names and loyalties. The method was always clean, salted, shaded, patient. When winter's stew tasted flat, a pinch from the paste jar taught it grammar, pickles proper. Vinegar and brine is a living system. Vinegar is a finished acid that still does work. Cucumbers and garlic in vinegar for weeks become crisp arguments. Onions blush into rose if you give them red wine vinegar and a spoon of honey. Beet slices marinate into stained glass. Vinegar is also how you rescue a ferment that did not behave. A kraut that went soft can still become a soup. A cucumber that sagged can be cooked into a relish with onion and seed. Rescue is part of the art. Waste is the only sin. Failures that teach a ferment that smells wrong, sharp rot, not clean sour, teaches you about hand washing, salt level, and keeping food under brine. A jar that molds on the surface reminds you of weights and lids, and that skimming must be firm, not timid. A pickle that mushes tells you it wanted cooler air or more salt, or that its cucumbers were tired at the market. A cheese that bittered needed fresher milk or a quicker hang or a cleaner cloth. These failures write notebooks in the head. The correction is rarely drama. It is usually earlier attention and cleaner tools. The taste of fireless cooking fermented foods taste settled. They carry a depth you cannot get by boiling or roasting. They navigate the body kindly. They carry vitamins that flame might have thinned. They ask less from fuel because time did part of the cooking while the brazier rested. In houses that rationed smoke, this mattered. Broths brightened by pickle brine required half the fire to taste complete. Porridges soured beforehand softened in half the minutes. A slice of cheese and a spoon of kraut turned a small stew into a meal. They also lengthened the conversation of a kitchen. A crock burbling quietly is a companion. Children learn to listen to jars, to read bubbles like weather, to taste bravely and spit politely if needed, to build palates that can tell clean sour from trouble. Elders keep starters like grandchildren, fed, praised, given names. The starters, in return, bring bread up from a doze a day in a fireless kitchen morning. Salt rubbed into sliced cabbage, fists kneading until sap runs. Pack down, leaf laid, stone set. Midday, milk warmed by proximity, starter whisked in, pot wrapped and tucked. A small jar of yesterday's bread and water stirred for leaven. Afternoon, fish salted in layers for a week's promise. Beet sticks brined. A crock of cucumbers burbling at their shoulders. Vinegar siphoned from last month's jar into bottles for the shelf. Evening, a stew whose last ladle is brightened with a spoon of kraut brine. A flatbread spread with fresh curd and a handful of pickled onions. A cup of grain kvass that tastes like hunger made calm. Before fireplaces lifted flames into chimneys, the world's kitchens were built not from iron or copper but from earth itself. Pots were clay that once was mud. Griddles were stones chosen from riverbanks. Ovens were pits and domes of sand and soil. The cookware was not separate from the world. It was simply the world asked to take on a new job. In homes without chimneys, where smoke drifted freely and heat had to be coaxed into obedience, these materials carried food through fire's moods, absorbing, holding. Releasing warmth with a patience metal has never fully matched clay. Earth that learned to sing in heat clay was fragile until taught otherwise. Early cooks discovered that if you fire a pot once, even in a bonfire, it changes from mud to vessel. Not impervious, not perfect, but able to hold water long enough to boil. The clay pot became the first mediator between food and flame. It could sit in embers, be banked with ash, or be hung from a tripod. Water inside kept it safe. As long as liquid remained, the clay would not crack from heat. Over time, people tempered clay with straw, shell, or sand so it would not sulk and split. Handles were rare, just rims you could grip with cloth or sticks. Pots blackened, flaked, and sometimes died in service, but they were cheap to replace, dug from the same earth, shaped again, fired again. Each pot carried a family's meals in its pores, seasoning as it went. Special clays became local legends. In some places, fine-grained red clays made porridge pots that hummed evenly. Elsewhere, dark volcanic clay kept stews tasting of mineral calm. The cook's ear was as important as the spoon. Clay pots speak when simmering, gentle rattles, whispering bubbles against the lid. A different voice for grains than for beans, stone. Fire's oldest plate before clay could be persuaded into vessels, stone was already at work. A flat slate or river stone heated near fire became a griddle for flatbreads, oatcakes, rice cakes, or maize patties. Smooth stones, split by water, offered cooking surfaces that did not cling too rudely. Rounded ones went into water to make it boil. A set of heated stones placed into a bark or skin container turned broth from wish into fact. The stones cracked sometimes, but that was expected. Sacrifice for supper. Big slabs leaned to reflect heat back at roasting meat. Small ones circled a fire to keep it honest. Stone was not only cookware. It was thermostat, timer, and sometimes the table itself, sand and soil. Earth that holds warmth in regions without good stone or clay, cooks turn to sand and soil. Sand can bury food like a slow embrace. tubers roasted when tucked under coals and sand. Birds wrapped in leaves steamed beneath. Earth pits became batch ovens. Stones heated, food layered with green leaves and damp grass, the pits sealed with soil. Hours later, steam billowed, and a feast emerged. Soil also made ovens above ground. Domes of packed clay or mud mixed with straw, dried in sun, then hardened by fire inside. These beehive ovens had no chimney. Smoke found its way out through cracks or the door. After the fire burned down, the walls held heat like memory. Ash swept out, loaves placed in, door sealed. Bread baked in silence while the oven whispered warmth back, cooking by mass, not flame. The genius of clay, stone, and sand is not speed but storage. They swallow heat, then let it go slowly, turning violent flame into gentle climate. Clay pots simmer after coals are gone. Stones keep embers lively longer. Sand insulates for hours. These were the first slow cookers, not gadgets, but habits of trust. Food cooked this way tastes different. Stews are silkier, grains more rounded, bread crusts crisp but never bitter. There is less burnt, less wasted. In chimneyless rooms, this mattered. Less smoke, less fuel, more patience. Failures and lessons. Clay pots crack if put empty on flame. Stones explode if chosen wet from the river. Sand lets in grit if the food is not wrapped. But each mistake wrote its correction into the next meal. The lesson was always, choose carefully, respect heat, trust time. Social shape of earth cookery. Earth cookware made meals communal. A pit oven served many at once. A stone griddle fed a circle of hands. Clay pots were big enough for family stews, never just one plate. Repair was part of the rhythm, patching a crack with slip, reshaping a pot, finding a new stone. Food and tools aged together. Each pot was a relative as much as a utensil. The modern EKU can still taste it. Bake bread on a pizza stone, and it remembers the river rock. Simmer stew in an englazed clay pot, and it remembers the first fire-baked vessels. Try a sand oven at the beach. Coals, food wrapped in leaves, buried and sealed. Hours later, you taste something the ancestors knew, that food touched by earth is calmer. Before chimneys rose to tame smoke, kitchens often trusted sticks, green branches, sharpened twigs, woven frames, and clever lattices to bring food close enough to fire without handing it over. Wood was everywhere, easy to shape and quick to replace. Where clay cracked and stone was heavy, sticks were light, flexible, and infinitely adjustable. With a few fork poles and straight branches, you could roast, smoke, dry, or suspend food in any manner you wished. Wooden engineering was the silent scaffolding of pre-fireplace cooking skewers. The oldest tools after hands. The simplest invention was a sharpened stick. Slide a fish through its belly, a bird through its shoulders, a strip of meat folded back and forth. Hold it near, not in, the fire. The wood does not need to touch flame. It only needs to act as arm and axle. Green wood works best, for it resists burning long enough to finish the task. Willow, hazel, apple, or birch, chosen for both sturdiness and the small seasoning they lend. You can roast several skewers at once by planting their blunt ends in the ground, leaning them toward the fire at an angle. Adjust the angle, adjust the heat. Turn occasionally, or let the day's breeze do some of the work. A frame of sticks across forked uprights makes a horizontal rack, where skewers can lie and be rotated in unison. Skewers gave cooks control by inches. A bird might need to face the fire for a quarter turn, then be lifted away. Fish, delicate, sat higher and roasted on radiant heat alone. Fat dripping could be managed with a trough of bread or grain beneath, never wasted. Grids and lattices from skewers. It is a small step to a grid. Sticks woven or laid crosswise, balanced on rocks or forked poles. Spread strips of meat, small fish, mushrooms, or slices of tuber. The fire licks beneath, never touching directly, and radiant heat does the rest. The grid becomes a proto-grill, but one you build fresh each time, dispose of, and rebuild without regret. In forest regions, racks rose tall, tiers of poles lashed together, food hung from hooks or spread across. A small fire below, not to cook fast but to smoke gently. Fish stiffen, meat firms, herbs dry to crispness. The rack becomes a seasonal monument. Autumn afternoons spent tending slow smoke so winter months could taste of plenty. Tripods and crosspoles, 3 sticks lashed together. A tripod made a kitchen in itself. Hang a pot, a basket, a hide bag filled with water and heated stones. Hang strips of meat to smoke. Hang herbs to dry. Adjust height by knot or hook. Rotate the tripod to shift from flame to ember. Crosspoles between 2 forked uprights gave another design. A bar for hanging pots, spits, or bundles of food wrapped in leaves. The whole thing could be broken down in minutes and carried on a journey. Nomadic cooks mastered this furniture of wood, which turned any clearing into a hearth. Wrapping and pinning sticks were also wrappers and pins. Fillets of fish were sandwiched between 2 lattices of thin branches and bound with bark strips, then set upright near fire to roast evenly. Dough could be wound in spirals around sticks and baked into twist bread. Thin slices of meat could be pinned flat between boards of green wood and leaned at an angle so radiant heat crisped them without drying. Even leaves gained new strength when pinned between twigs. Packets of herbs, mushrooms, or small roots tied with grass and skewered through to hold together. The stick was not only support but a seal, keeping steam in and air out. Wooden utensils, wooden safety. Cooking without chimneys meant smoke was always nearby. Wood offered a solution by being both tool and buffer. Wooden spoons stirred without scalding hands. Wooden lids, just planks laid across, reduced sparks and helped steam behave. Wooden troughs caught fat without clanging or heating too fast. And if one cracked or burned, another was carved in an hour. The only caution was flame. You never held a dry stick in the fire too long. It would ignite. Green wood was safer, or a quick soak in water before service. Handles were cut long, not short, so hands could stay clear of smoke. Tools wore out quickly but cost nothing to replace. Lessons learned. Cooking with sticks teaches attention. You learn the sweet spot between ember and flame. You listen to wood's creak when it begins to char. You see how different woods smell and taste when their smoke lingers. Every adjustment is by hand and by eye. A good cook with only sticks could prepare a meal as varied as any modern grill master. Flatbreads, skewers, smoked fish, dried fruit, stewed porridge in a hanging bag. The social shapestick cooking was participatory. Children could hold skewers, elders could weave racks, travelers could cut poles for a tripod. Meals were a circle around flame, each with a role. Smoke drifted up through a roof hole or out a door left ajar, but the work was shared, the pace democratic. When dinner was done, the frames were unlashed, the sticks returned to earth, nothing wasted. Modern eco campfires still honor this craft. A forked branch is a hot dog skewer, a tripod for a stew pot, bread spiraled on a stick. It is all the same grammar. Even in a modern kitchen, a bamboo steamer or wooden skewer remembers the old rules: distance, patience, renewal. Before fireplaces channeled smoke and iron pots ruled kitchens, many households and camps turned to stones as their true cookware. Fire itself was hard to manage in closed rooms, but stones, heated, carried, and placed, were obedient intermediaries. With them, you could boil water without metal, cook stews without chimneys, and prepare feasts where no vessel dared stand in flame. This was stone cooking, an art of choosing the right rocks, heating them patiently, and letting their stored fire seep gently into food. Choosing stones like ingredients. Not all stones are equal. A wrong stone, soft, wet, or fractured, explodes when heated, scattering shrapnel. The right stones, dense, smooth, river-worn, or volcanic, hold heat without shattering. River stones were favorites, because centuries of tumbling had made them solid and trustworthy. Volcanic rocks, porous but resilient, heated quickly and cooled slowly. Families passed knowledge: never limestone, never lead shale. Yes to basalt, yes to granite. Each stone had a personality. A small egg-sized stone could finish a cup of broth. A fist-sized stone could cook porridge. Stones the size of melons could roast a feast in a pit. They were chosen not only for safety but for how they released warmth, quickly, steadily, or with long patience. Boiling without pots cracked. Skins leaked, spark charred, but hot stones turned any vessel into a boiler. You filled a wooden trough, a bark bowl, or an animal stomach with water and food. Then you carried glowing stones with tongs of wood, rinsed them quickly in water to brush off ash, and dropped them in with care. Steam burst, bubbles leapt, broth began. The stones hissed, cooled, and were replaced by others from the fire. In cycles, the stew thickened, grain softened, and the room filled with aroma. The stones themselves became darkened, sometimes cracked, but each meal was a record of their labor. Some families had cooking stones passed down, smooth with soot and oil, trusted like tools. Stone boiling in feast-hole communities cooked with stones when no other method could serve so many. A pit was dug, lined with hot stones, laid with leaves, meat, roots, and herbs, then sealed with soil. Hours later, the feast emerged steaming, tender. Infused with the earth itself today in winter, large heated stones were carried into skin bags or hollow logs filled with broth to make great stews without raising smoke indoors. People sat around the vessel, each dipping bowls while new stones were added. The meal was participation, fire made communal and safe, stones for bread and griddle-flat stones served as griddles, preheated near embers, then smeared with doughs of barley, millet, or maize. The breads baked quickly, edges curling, surfaces blistering gently. Some stones were raised on smaller stones, making a primitive hot plate. The breads carried a mineral taste, a faint perfume of the river or mountain where the stone was born. Others used heated stones buried in grain to make slow dry roasting possible. Nuts, seeds, and even coffee's ancestors were tamed by stones more than flame. Lessons of carestone cooking required patience. Heat them too fast, and they fractured. Drop them too suddenly, and your soup scattered. Handle them poorly, and burns taught you respect. Children were trained to know the smell of overheated rock, the sound of a crack beginning, the color that meant ready but not furious. Each stone was a teacher. A smooth stone that had served 20 boils was kept in a special basket. When it finally broke, it was thanked and returned to the earth. Cooking was not just technique. It was ritual respect. Social shape of stone mealstone cookery slowed the day. While rocks heated, stories were told. While stew bubbled, stones rotated. Meals became cycles, not moments. Elders judged doneness not by clock but by stone voice. The hiss when dropped, the steadiness of bubbles, the color of steam. Food prepared this way was more than sustenance. It was a rhythm of waiting, tending, trusting. And because stones carried heat silently, indoor rooms were safer. Less open flame, fewer sparks, more control. The chimney was not yet there, but the stone was already the chimney's apprentice, mediating fire into patience. The modern Ekayu can taste this tradition in any campfire stew. Heat stones carefully, place them in a pot of water, and watch how quickly it comes alive. Bake flatbread on a pizza stone, and you echo the river rock. Build an earth oven with heated stones and sealed leaves, and you repeat what ancestors did on every continent. Stone cookery has never left us. It is the foundation of slow food. Before fireplaces drew smoke neatly upward, kitchens lived inside the haze. But what felt like inconvenience to lungs was also a gift to food. Smoke dries, flavors, and preserves. Warmth without flame turns perishables into stores for winter. In chimneyless homes, people mastered the art of smoking and drying, not as decoration, but as survival. Fish, meat, herbs, fruits, even cheeses were hung, strung, or laid on racks where smoke curled lazily and heat whispered instead of shouted. Why smoke matters? Smoke is more than perfume. It is chemistry. Creosotes and phenols from burning would slow spoilage, inhibit mold, and lend flavor that outlasts seasons. Combine smoke with drying air and a touch of salt, and you have food that keeps without firewood or fuss. For communities without chimneys, smoke that lingered in rafters was not entirely a nuisance, it was a guardian. The low fires and long watcher smoking requires small, steady fires, not roaring flame. Cooks built smudge fires, embers covered with damp wood chips, moss, or sawdust, sending up cool, fragrant smoke. In chimneyless rooms, these fires sat at the hearth's edge or even in shallow pits beneath hanging food. The task was patience. Too much flame, and food scorched. Too little, and it spoiled. Families took turns tending embers, adding chips slowly, adjusting airflow by opening a door crack or shifting a pot. The rhythm was quiet. Feed fire. Check smoke, turn meat, weight, racks, poles, and hanging lines without iron hooks. Households invented wooden scaffolds, racks of sticks lashed together, laid above the hearth. Crosspoles tied between beams, where fish and sausages could dangle. Grass ropes braided to hold herbs, peppers, or mushrooms in bunches. Above, the smoke curled, drying and flavoring. Rafters became pantries. Visitors could read a family's fortune in what hung there: strings of apples, rows of fish, bundles of greens, fish and meat. The classic fairfish were split, salted lightly, and hung head down near smoke. Their oils dripped into ash. Their flesh slowly tightened into a state between fresh and preserved. Salmon strips in the north, herring by the sea, trout in mountain villages, all carried the signature of their hearths. Meats were sliced thin, salted, and laid on racks. Fatty cuts were less suited. Lean meats dried better. Strips became jerky. Long ropes became smoked sausages. Whole cuts, hams, shoulders, were brined, then smoked for days. In small homes, these larger projects were rare. But in barns, sheds, or caves adapted for smoke, whole communities prepared winter larders this way. Fruits, roots, and greens, not only flesh, took to smoke. Apples, pears, plums, sliced and strung, dried slowly above the hearth, absorbing faint perfume. Roots like turnips and beets were sliced thin, dried into chips to be softened later in stews. Greens and herbs, bundled, crisped in the warm smoke, their oils preserved for months. In some regions, even cheese was smoked, not for novelty, but to keep molds from misbehaving. Wheels hung near rafters darkened, firmed, and travelled through winter without complaint. The hearth as pantry in chimneyless homes, the ceiling beams became cupboards. Above the central fire, always smouldering, hung lines of food. Smoke curled around them day and night, drying steadily. The very air of the house was part of preservation. Guests entered not just into a room, but into an edible archive, every hanging shape a promise against hunger. Failures and fixes if meat spoiled, the fire had died too often, or salt was stingy. If fish tasted bitter, the wood was wrong, resinous pine instead of fruitwood or hardwood. If fruit dried to leather instead of crispness, it needed thinner slices or a warmer spot. If mold came, airflow was lacking. Open a door, stir the smoke. Mistakes were not tragedies, but teachers. Families learned by smell, by color, by handfeel. Social rhythm of smoking and drying turned into seasonal rituals. Autumn afternoons filled rafters with harvest. Neighbors helped string apples, cut strips, turn racks. Children learned to twist herbs into bundles, to keep the fire polite. Stories were told in smoke-sweetened air. The work was quiet but communal, preserving not just food, but fellowship. The modern echo today, you can still practice it. A small smoker or even a lidded grill can echo the old smudge fire. Dry fruit slices on racks near gentle heat, or even in sun with screens, and you repeat the rafter work. Try hanging herbs in your kitchen, letting them crisp naturally in the air. Every whiff of smoke on fish, every chew of dried apple, carries back to the hearths that had no chimneys. Only smoke-laden rafters where food became time made edible. Milk is a fragile food. In a world without chimneys, where smoke filled the rafters and boiling was inconvenient, milk was rarely consumed raw for long. Instead, it was guided gently, left to sour, set, thicken, and turn into forms that kept better, travelled farther, and nourished deeper. These were the quiet crafts of clabber, curds, butter, and fresh cheeses, made with little more than patience, cloth, and cool corners. The gift of souring fresh milk left in a clean vessel, pottery, gourd, or wooden bowl, will naturally clabber. Lactic bacteria already present transform the liquid into a soft gel. In homes without fireplaces, this process required no fire, no effort. Only a safe place, away from sun, away from dirt. Steady in temperature, clabbered milk was spooned as a meal. sweetened with honey or fruit when fortune allowed, or salted and stirred into stews. It thickened broths, enriched grains, and served as a light. Refreshing food in summer when heavy meals felt oppressive, from clabber to curds once clabbered. Milk could be gently warmed by setting the pot near embers, not in flame. Heat encouraged curds to separate from whey. Curds were scooped, strained in cloth, and salted to taste. They could be eaten fresh, pressed into small wheels, or dried further in air and smoke. Whey, still nutritious, flavored soups or fed animals. Nothing was wasted. Without chimneys, this was all done with indirect heat, embers banked carefully, a warm stone placed under the pot, or simply time on a shelf in a smoky room. The smoke itself discouraged pests and flavored the air where cheeses dried. Butter, shaken, not stirred cream rose naturally when milk sat undisturbed in shallow vessels. Skimmed with wooden ladles, it became the raw material for butter. Without chimneys or kitchens built for comfort, butter making was often done in motion. Cream was poured into animal skins or wooden churns and shaken while walking, riding, or working. The agitation separated butterfat from buttermilk. Butter was salted and packed into clay pots or wrapped in leaves, while buttermilk became a starter for new clabber, a drink, or a leavening for bread. In smoky homes, butter was stored away from the hearth to keep it sweet. Fresh cheeses and early preservation press curds became farmers' cheeses, simple wheels that could last a few days longer than milk. Salt extended their life. Drying near the hearth gave them firmness. Some were wrapped in leaves or cloth, others coated with ash or herbs for protection. Longer preservation meant hardening. Small cheeses hung in rafters, absorbing smoke and airflow, slowly firming into tangy rounds that grated into stews or travelled on journeys. Cheese was both food and storage, a way of saving milk from spoiling in rooms where fire could not always be used freely. Social shape of dairy work was rhythmic, tied to daily milking. Morning milk might be drunk fresh. Midday milk clabbered by evening. Yesterday's curds pressed and salted. Last week's cheese already drying near rafters. Children helped skim cream. Women churned. Elders judged clabber by jiggle and scent. The work was not heavy but constant. Threaded through everyday. Butter making was often communal. Neighbors lending arms to churn, songs keeping rhythm. Cheese drying overhead perfumed homes with a promise of meals to come. Dairy was both sustenance and ritual of care, failures and lessons if milk spoiled foul, the vessel was unclean or placed in sun. If clabber wouldn't set, the air was too cold. The pot must sit near a warmth. If curds broke small and weak, the milk was too thin or the warming too hurried. If butter turned rancid, salt was forgotten or storage was careless. Each failure was repairable. The lesson was always patience and cleanliness. Fire was not the answer. The modern echo can echo these methods even now. Leave raw milk, if safe and clean, to clabber naturally. Spoon as yogurt. Warm gently and strain into curds. Salt lightly. Enjoy fresh. Skim cream. Shake in a jar until butter forms. Rinse, salt, and taste the past. Hang fresh cheese in cloth for a day, then smoke it gently on a grill for a rustic flavor. These practices remind us that milk never needed chimneys to become versatile. With only time, cloth, and a steady corner, it becomes a library of foods, each transformation quiet, each flavor deeper than the last. Bread feels like the oldest companion of civilization. Yet in many ages and places there were no ovens, no fireplaces, no chimneys, only open flame, coals, and patience. Still, people made flatbreads, ash cakes, and griddle loaves that carried grain into daily life. These breads were quick, portable, and forgiving. The kind that fed travelers, shepherds, and families in humble huts where smoke wandered freely. Flat stones as first griddles. A flat river stone set near embers was often the first baking surface. Once heated, the stone released its warmth steadily, enough to cook a thin disk of dough spread across it. Barley in the Levant, millet in Africa, maize in the Americas, oats in the North, all found their way onto stones. The breads were thin, chewy, sometimes scorched at the edges but still nourishing. The method was simple. Heat the stone gradually. Sweep its surface clean. Press the dough flat with hands. Then wait for bubbles to rise. Flip once, or not at all. The stone remembered the fire and lent the bread a mineral taste, a hint of the riverbed or mountainside it came from. Ash cakes. Bread hidden in coals. Another technique was to let the fire itself be the oven. Dough was shaped into patties or logs, wrapped lightly in leaves or not at all, and buried in warm ash. The ash insulated the dough, baking it from all sides, sealing in moisture. When pulled out, the bread carried a grey skin that was brushed away to reveal a tender crumb. In villages and camps alike, ash cakes were everyday food, quick, fuel efficient, and possible even indoors where only embers smoldered. They could be eaten plain, split and filled with herbs or cheese, or crumbled into stews, griddle loaves and improvised pans. When claywork advanced, people pressed shallow pans or domed lids into service as griddles. Dough baked on the inside of a heated lid, sometimes inverted over embers, creating breads with blistered surfaces. In some traditions, inverted clay pots became miniature ovens, the pot heated first. Then dough pressed inside, baked against its hot walls. Wooden platters, lined with leaves, sometimes stood in as surfaces when stones were absent. Heated gently with hot stones placed underneath, they bake softer breads more like dumplings. Steam and leaf wraps leaves, cabbage, grape, banana, turn dough into steamed breads. Bundles were set above embers or in pits with heated stones and damp vegetation. The result was soft, fragrant bread infused with leaf oils. In places without chimneys, steaming was especially useful. Less smoke, shorter fire time, more moist results, flavor and survival. These early breads were rarely fluffy or tall. They were dense, earthy, often eaten the same day. But they carried survival. A handful of grain transformed into something transportable and filling. They matched the pace of a world without metal ovens. A world where cooking had to be improvised each day. The flavor was honest, sometimes smoky, sometimes sweet from maize or millet, sometimes bitter from wild grains, but always deeply tied to the land. To eat such bread was to eat the field and the fire together. Social shape bread without ovens was often a shared task. Children mixed dough, women shaped cakes, men carried stones from the river. Ash cakes could be buried for a dozen at once, then pulled out and shared with laughter. Flatbreads baked on stones were torn by hand, passed around the circle, dipped into a single pot of stew. Bread was not a side dish. It was the handle of the meal. The modern ecoyu can still try these methods today. Heat a flat stone on a grill and bake thin breads directly on it. Wrap dough in cabbage leaves, bury it in embers, and taste ash bread. Invert a clay pot over coals and press dough to its inside walls. These are echoes of meals cooked before chimneys, when ingenuity turned earth, ash, and leaf into an oven that traveled with you.